Hello and welcome to the Pacific Debate 2012. I'm Tanya Nugent and it's my pleasure to be here with you today in beautiful Port Vila Harbour in our big ocean. Thank you for joining us. This is the third Pacific Debate instigated by the Pacific Institute of Public Policy, PIP, the region's leading independent think tank. And this year, the Pacific Media Assistance Scheme, or PACMAS, has also come on board as a major partner in the Pacific Debate. PIP exists to create and support policy dialogue, to stimulate discussions, those important discussions concerning our region. And that's exactly what today's debate hopes to achieve with the motion, "In this, the Pacific century and a new era of strategic contest, island states should be neutral." And we have a panel of great minds here today to help us think through this important and challenging subject. And it's my great pleasure to introduce them to you now. Retired Major General Jerry Singirok was a career military officer in the Papua New Guinea Defence Force, graduating at the Joint Services College in Papua New Guinea in 1976. In 1995, he was promoted to Brigadier General and appointed Commander of the Papua New Guinea Defence Force during the height of the Bougainville crisis. He currently runs his own consultancy company and sits on two major investment boards in Papua New Guinea. Kaliopate Tavola worked for 11 years as a civil servant in the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forest, rising to the rank of Chief Economist. He joined Fiji Sugar Marketing Co., which took him to Europe, where he also was a diplomat. After 14 years abroad, he returned to Fiji, entering politics, where he served as Minister for Foreign Affairs and External Trade from 2000 to 2006. Currently, he operates as a consultant. Senator Peter Christian is the at-large representative of the State of Pohnpei to the 17th Congress of the Federated States of Micronesia. In addition to government, Christian has championed many national issues. Most notable was his role as the chief negotiator for the amended Compact of Free Association with the United States of America. He also chaired the FSM task force that replaced operations of the ExxonMobil Corporation in FSM with the FSM Petroleum Corporation. Congressman Eni Faleomavaega has been representing the territory of American Samoa in the United States Congress since 1989. He is the longest serving and only Samoan in the US Congress. Faleomavaega is a member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and the House Committee on Natural Resources. He is the first Asian Pacific American ever to chair the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific, and now serves as a ranking member. Our moderator in this discussion is Ms. Anna Naupa. Anna is a Ni Vanuatu development practitioner specialising in land policy, gender equality and democratic governance. She's worked with community groups, NGOs and government to support increased dialogue and participation on national development processes. And I will now hand the floor over to Anna to commence the Pacific Debate for 2012.
Thank you, Tanya. This Pacific Debate is timely as we look around our region at the geopolitics at play between a number of regional and global powers. These powers are using diplomacy, money and the power of ideas beyond strategic military operations to win the hearts and minds of Pacific Island states. But are we hearing Pacific Island voices in this debate? Unlike yesteryear's hesitant leadership, Pacific Island states today are practicing a much more assertive diplomacy, a delicatessen diplomacy, if you like, where there are a range of choices for island states to pick and choose and practice a more independent, a more flexible external relations. So should Pacific states remain neutral in the strategic contest for geopolitical power in our region? Let's find out. Our panellists here today will each have 3 minutes to present their opening statement and against their position. At the 2.5-minute mark, we will hear a tam-tam beat for 2 beats to signal that they have half a minute left to go. and then the tam-tam will beat again at the 3-minute mark, signalling a 10-second roundup of your argument. And then it will open up into a question and answer among the panel before it then goes out to the audience to pose some questions. So our first panellist today speaking for the motion is Mr. Kaliopate Tavola.
Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. I do believe that island states should be neutral. Firstly, because island states have no direct interest in the global geopolitics that drive these strategic contests. We have our own interests and concerns to promote, and I submit that our interests are Pacific regionalism, climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, green growth. We need to promote these issues and these interests to one and all, but not to get embroiled in the global and geopolitics. I do believe that island states should be neutral. Secondly, because if island states align themselves with any of the conflicting nations, we risk escalating the contests and hostilities and may drag others into these hostilities. That speaks for itself. Our ocean is an ocean of peace. Let us keep it that way. Thirdly, island states should be neutral. Through neutrality, we can claim the Pacific century for ourselves first and foremost. The Pacific Ocean is our home. We are responsible for its stewardship. Let us give the Pacific century its form and characters before others do it. It's not too late. Island states should be neutral because we need to be strategic ourselves in this new era of strategic contest. Strategy is a direct or indirect course of action consisting of a series of maneuvers to reach an objective at a cost that is significantly less than the benefits to be gained. I submit that our course of action is neutrality. Our series of maneuvers is to strengthen Pacific regionalism, our regional governance. American political philosopher and constitutional lawyer Alexander Hamilton in 1787 said, "Even to observe neutrality, you must have a strong government." Our objective is to elevate ourselves as a global force to be reckoned with. The benefit is cost effectiveness. That is what I submit as our strategy. Island states should be neutral because neutrality, for once, is now an opportunity on which island states can make a decision. During the Cold War, our alignment on neutrality was imposed from the global powers. Let us use this opportunity, stay neutral, and strengthen our global influence. We are not in a position of weakness. Finally, because in neutrality, island states can escape the harm inflicted by the conflicting parties. We should take heed of what Cordell Hull, Nobel Peace Prize winner, said in 1945, "It rarely pays to get between a dog and a lamppost." Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tavola. I like the analogy of getting between a dog and a lamppost or not. I'm just interested in a follow-up question to your statement that you've made. In your former capacity as Fijian Minister for Foreign Affairs, you had to deal with alliance politics between China and Taiwan. How has that impacted on Fiji's neutrality?
It was easy in a way of carrying it out. We acknowledged the one China policy, but in terms of the relationship with Taiwan, it was a commercial relationship, and we were able to live with that. And that was the stance we took.
I think that's going to be an interesting theme that we'll probably pick up as this debate moves on. We're now going to go to Senator Peter Christian from the Federated States of Micronesia, who will be speaking against the motion.
Moderator, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Halbert, thank you for coming with me. Respect for one another is the foundation of our Pacific culture and heritage. And I will begin with that. The Pacific debate, the Pacific Islands state should be neutral. If I did not know enough, I would think this was a trick question. In this Pacific century, the island states of our region have not just an opportunity, but also a demanding responsibility to engage others as equal members of the world community. I believe that a retreat into a self-proclaimed, self-imposed neutrality would be an application of that responsibility. To take a position of neutrality now, when the world sorely needs peace and stability, would not only be judged as selfish, it would only be considered strategically wrong and also politically irresponsible. I believe that neutrality is simply not an option for Pacific Island states at this time. Furthermore, in an era of increasing globalization, neutrality is not a practical platform to pose on. Micronesia is not a stranger to the ravages of war, the conflicts that happened between big nations, having been trampled over by warring nations who saw no boundaries nor care about neutrality. While many do not know of Micronesia as a region, they know some of the battlefields of a war that has left painful memories in the minds of innocent bystanders. We have also experienced the life of being wards of other nations, just as other Pacific nations have experienced. And like other Pacific communities in the southern part of our region, Micronesians have also seen the blossoms of atomic explosions in their own lagoons. We have declared, therefore, that as a people who have seen war, we now wish for peace. But peace and security for our region can no longer be left in the hands of others. We must participate. We must engage in active discussions about our region, whether these discussions are about economic assistance or peace and security for the all-inclusive us. Let us make sure that also in this century of the Pacific, no more discussions about us take place without us. Like climate change and the resulting sea level rise, the threat of armed conflict and the ensuing inflicted pains, the lost hope for full recovery, are not just the sounds of distant drums of war. They are part of our history. They are part of our present life. They are real. They are tangible. Most, if not all of these, happened without our participation. Let us therefore take our cue from our past, and let us engage with other nations to not only pursue our values and interests, but also promote these values and interests to people who may listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. I do have a follow-up question for you as well. By favouring certain alliances over others, and therefore being against neutrality, are we keeping true to the Pacific way, which is about building consensus, being non-confrontational, being a friend to all?
Well, thank you very much. I don't think that I said we would favor one alliance against another alliance. What I said that we must engage all who have an interest in our Pacific area. That is what I said.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. We will now go to our second panellist who will be speaking for the motion. We have General Jerry Singirok from Papua New Guinea.
Madam Moderator, distinguished guests, eminent statesmen and women of this great region of ours, the Pacific, let me confirm my debate with my colleague, which is arguing that Pacific states should remain neutral with the superpower rivalry in the Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, geopolitics defines our position in the region as the geography, the tyranny of distance, location, size, climate, topography, and demography, and of course with it natural resources of abundance. The Pacific is now described as the poacher's paradise, as we saw in 1935 to 1942, except that this time the entry of China and many unassuming opportunists because of the availability of one, raw materials, secondly, weak states, which are later on characterized in the later definition, and of course, the opportunity for smaller states to build their capacity, mainly through the economy and security. Therefore, the vulnerabilities of Pacific states are determined by many or few unscrupulous regimes, weak political systems, and unstable governments, and weak or no military presence or military force to protect national interests and state security. Therefore, the respective states and the entry into the bilateral agreement without sanctions by other foreign members are indicative of these intrusions. My colleague and I are proposing that we remain neutral for the following reasons. We must build capacity. We promote good governance through promoting bilateral relations and multi-relationship in the region. We increase and promote regional ties. We maximize and centralize resources. And of course, we must have a cohesive force and voice in which we already have. This will take time, but we will allow the current status quo to continue within the spirit of the Pacific Way. The Pacific Way of non-confrontation and compromise has always been part of our culture, and therefore we will continue to promote it for regional peace and global prosperity. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, General Singirok. How has jostling for influence between the US and China played out in Papua New Guinea recently?
I think we've got to see the global context in that the Chinese are determined to be the champions in global trade and economy. So they have that trust, which is to support their economy by entering the Pacific, as we stated, and exploiting, for a better word, the natural resources that we have. Now, that's being handled within the context of that commercial opportunity between Papua New Guinea and China. America is the funny one because the Americans are pushing a global agenda through the use of military power. And obviously, they're supporting the multi-corporate corporate organizations like ExxonMobil, etc., in Papua New Guinea. So obviously, the presence of Americans are somehow supported through these corporate organizations. But the real key issue, the concerns that we all have, is the presence of the American military in Guam, which will now set a new phase of this military dimension which the Americans will play in the Pacific.
Thank you. It'll be interesting to hear Congressman Eni Faleomavaega's position against the motion. Congressman?
Au te mo whawhai maru atu le pa ia mal mamalu le tātou atunu ua lo whakatasi mai le nei mawhitanga. Ai se I whamaru atu se tam whai atu pa wā le tūlanga le tātou whairo inga nei aso. I want to take on the lead from what my colleague had stated earlier about something concerning the past. And I believe it was the poet-philosopher Santayana who said, those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Whether it be for good or for evil, those are facts. It indicates in the motion about the Pacific century. I think we need to be realistic. This is the Asia-Pacific century. We have to understand that because the vast majority of the populations of the world is in the Asia-Pacific. 6 of the 10 largest armies in the world is in the Asia-Pacific region. Economic interests of every country in the world is now focusing on the Asia-Pacific region. So we cannot neglect that reality. Asia-Pacific countries have come a long way in terms of the varieties of ethnicities, nationalities. You know it, we have it. There are very few exceptions. And in those days, the words colonialism and imperialism and communism and fascism and Nazism were not bad words. It depends who was the master and who was the slave. At the height of the Cold War, there was a fundamental question as to whether the world was going to turn communist or be like a democracy like the United States of America. Well, you know what happened. The Soviet Union fell apart at the expense of the Americans paying about $5 trillion in economic and military resources, so that the sense of freedom to live will be such that it's an integral part of our world community. The Warsaw Pact, we also understand that. There are two major things that we need to understand in terms of history. The two atom bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which brought in the nuclear age and the nuclear arms race that's also being realized as a reality. 1972, President Nixon made a major decision in terms Beijing became a partner and the cause of the world's geopolitical situation. 1978, Deng Xiaoping decided to change China's economy into a more free market and capitalistic system, which is very major and important in my opinion. So the point that I wanted to make here is that there's nothing wrong with being neutral depending on what the issues are. There's a more fundamental question, though, I want to say that there is no option to concern ourselves when we talk about neutrality. It talks about whether we have a decision. We know we've had conferences, the G20, the G8, now 2 years ago there's a G2. And much to the disappointment of some of our allies, let's face it, People's Republic of China and the United States are the two major players. Those are the realities. And let's just say, despite all the things that we can become neutral in voting abstention to the United Nations, the deeper question about neutrality is that when there is a question of having a choice between communism or Marxism against democracy, I think neutrality is not an option. And I want to say also, reminders, the least effective form of government is democracy, but can you think of a better one? And then also another point I wanted to make is that the neutrality, Pacific Island nations are given the choice to choose between democracy and communism. As I said earlier, it's not a question. It begs the question why some 671,000 students from all over the world attend America's colleges and universities. Why dropouts like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates have built a foundation of greater opportunities for all people to prosper. And why a devout Muslim African-American grandfather who served as a cook in the British Army could have a grandson who later became President of the United States. I hear.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm just interested in the idea that you're raising about it. You cannot be neutral in this era, and that Pacific Island voices do need to be heard and do need to take a stance. But do you think that they are able to be heard and be considered by these G2 that you say? Is the voice that is being raised an equal voice? Is that part of the debate about neutrality?
The reality is that China now is the second most powerful economy in the world. The reality is that the United States and China, not necessarily they're confrontational. The reality is that they have to work together. There are issues that we disagree upon in a most, a very serious way. To suggest that the United States and all its our military budget for this coming year is only about $650 billion to run our Army and our Navy for 1 year. Last year it was $760 billion. Question about the South China Seas. 40% of the world's trade and economy and commerce goes through the South China Sea. And there's some serious problems with Asian countries and their relationships with China as to whether or not we're going to allow this. It's in our economic interests, and I think that's the bearing right there on neutrality. If it bears your direct economic and military interests, I don't think there's no position for neutrality in this effort.
Thank you, Congressman. I think this is a question to the panel. Those who are interested can speak up, but I'm really interested in unpacking this concept of neutrality further, because we've heard from the panelists that trade and military strength are all intertwined in this current contest for geopolitics in the region. Everything is interconnected. No Pacific Island state does not use manufactured goods from China. We're all using internet technology from the US. You know, can we really be neutral in this day and age, as you're saying? I mean, perhaps the side for neutrality can offer another opinion.
By being neutral, it doesn't mean that we are restricting our relationships. We will be trading with one and all. We will be negotiating with one and all. We would be going to the UN and talking to one and all. So we will be, we'll just have an open house kind of arrangement, politics, free politics, that we engage with one and all. But we are not going to be embroiled in the geopolitics that drive the conflicts between nations.
But doesn't that create a bit of a schizophrenic relationship with countries? Isn't there a danger in if you say yes to everyone, which is, you know, part of Pacific culture, that we're then creating these overlapping alliances that can create further contest or further misunderstanding?
Your relationships are either at a bilateral level or multilateral level, and they run parallel and can be quite interdependent in the way you approach things. So I don't really see any problem. We can relate to everyone with all the issues that we have.
Well, this is another interesting question, and perhaps the side against the motion might be interested in responding. But in terms of, you know, Mr. Tavola has pointed out that there are different layers of neutrality. There's the national interest, the bilateral interest, and then you're looking at the regional work. And we see the rise of sub-regional groups like the Melanesian Spearhead Group, we have the Polynesian Union, we have the Micronesian Leaders Group. And do you think that this rise of sub-regional groups points to a more coordinated foreign policy for the region in the future? Or is foreign policy very much the domain of national governments?
But if we understand basically the foundation of the South Pacific Commission was a relic of the post-colonial period where you have major powers like France, Great Britain, and the United States continuing to control of the natives, so to speak, South Pacific Commission. And when political issues were raised, they said, no, you can't discuss it. And that's what started the whole dialogue of leaders like Mara and Henry from the Cook Islands to say, hey, we need to organize a different organization. And that's what gave birth to the Pacific Island Forum countries. But the point I wanted to make is that historically, I see nothing wrong with countries participating in different regional organizations, whatever their interests might draw them to become participants in that. I see nothing wrong with that.
Do you have a view to offer in that regard, Senator?
You know, my colleagues who speak against or speak for the issue have not denied the fact that economic assistance, economic interaction with other countries is still an important part of our governments. They have hammered on geopolitical as the thing that must be under the neutrality issue. But the neutrality issue of this debate is not just about geopolitics. It's about the whole round sphere of things in the Pacific. The FSM belongs to the Forum. That's one step for us. We have a free association agreement with the United States. We have a diplomatic relations with China. We work with Taiwan. We work with Japan. We see absolutely nothing wrong with having to interact with other countries who are willing and able to give assistance to the Pacific, not just in the form of economic assistance, but technical knowledge transfer, including safety at sea, food risks issues. And I think that without some of these organizations, if we absent ourselves, remove ourselves from these interactions with them, we would lose.
I might also add, I note that with interest about U.S. influence, whether it be for good or for evil among some of the countries. 4 or 5% of the world's population is in the United States. which consumes about 25 to 30% of the world's energy resources, which also provides more humanitarian assistance than any other countries, which also has a high percentage, about 25% of its assets are contributed to the IMF, to the World Bank, to the Asian Development Bank, all in the process of what? Giving assistance to Pacific Island nations as well as all other countries of the world. So you can say that, yeah, the United States is very strong militarily, but sometimes you have to show your military strength in order to be able to work in a positive way the needs of other countries as well. And I mentioned South China Sea as a classic example where one country seems to suggest that they own the South China Sea, and the United States is saying, I believe other Asian countries also have an interest, and we also have an interest in terms of our economic interests, as well as every Pacific Island country here.
I'm just really interested in, again, just playing off that and going back to this side, which was for the motion. It was said on this side that it's somebody else's contest. Let's focus on the Pacific. Let's not engage in a debate, in a contest that is nothing to do with this region. But does this neutrality enable the Pacific nations, the Pacific states, to determine the rules of this engagement at the geopolitical level? You talk about China being very strong, and the US, it's these big powers, but is the Pacific voice being able to say what happens in this space enough?
Yes, let me reconfirm what my colleague and I have already proposed to the panel and the audience, is that the characters of the Pacific nations are that of neutrality, that of peace, that of opening the door for friends and relatives to come. I think the issue now really is the onus is on each individual states to build such capacity through diplomatic relations to allow assistance to come in. Now, let's not forget that there's a lot of pressure on Pacific nations now. I mean, although Pacific nations are young, it's still growing. We go through the process of remodeling our state economy, our government, our systems, and at the same time, Pacific nations should use forums to build capacity, sharing resources, sharing ideas, in order to be a voice, to build a greater character out of what's already inbuilt in us. I think in that way we can, through the Pacific voice, have a say as to where the superpower rivalry will go. Now, we didn't have that opportunity before Second World War. We have the opportunity now to look at these strengths and work on it. And let's not forget that every state has its own national interest and security to manage. And I think it's only realizing those weaknesses, those challenges that each state has, that will build a larger capacity so that we can deal with these challenges in front of our door.
Just to add to that, I think when we talk about geopolitics, it's a politics of trying to dominate and control. And I do believe that in the Pacific, we have no business in trying to control and dominate. We have the interest to grow and to stabilize the region. And we've been referring to Pacific regionalism, and it has come up in the discussions. We do believe that in order to have an influence in the world, to have a strong hand in our negotiations, we have to have a strong region. And the concept of sub-regionalism has come up. We do believe that to create a strong region, we also want to have a strong sub-regionalism. They go hand in hand together. They're certainly not opposing forces. They can go hand in hand together. We should take advantage and develop the Pacific regionalism.
Perhaps this side has an opinion to offer.
There were some questions raised years ago for which we say, hey, absolutely, by all means, go for it. The Melanesian Spearhead Group was organized. The Micronesians organized themselves, but the Polynesians never have organized. And the concern there is that we wanted to maintain a sense of cohesiveness among all the different factions, especially through the Pacific Island Forum countries. But now, obviously, the situation of the forum is not very cohesive, put it mildly. And so now the Polynesians are saying, hey, we need to organize ourselves too. So we're going to have 3 sub-regional organizations. So where does the object of saying that, well, we've got to organize? I think that's somewhat unrealistic because, and for a good reason, the Melanesian Spirit Group has good reasons to organize because you have common interests. The geography and all of that, you should work together to provide more prosperous economies. For the same reason the Micronesians are doing the same. And the Polynesians are going to have to come up with the goods too in that regard.
But don't you see some, I guess, conflict of interest between that bilateral and sub-regional or regional level where you have groups like the Melanesian Spearhead Group, where its member states all have different positions with regards to China and Taiwan? How do you reconcile? And it comes back to the question we've covered already, but I think it's something that warrants further unpacking, is how do you reconcile that national...
You don't need to reconcile it. If it's in your national interest to say that we stay neutral, and listen, we voted, there's votes going on abstentions all the time in the United Nations and most other regional organizations. Nothing wrong with voting neutral, whatever that means. But I think the more fundamental issue that we're making the argument about neutrality being a relative term, when it comes to when the chips are down, having to decide where do you really turn as a government and as a people between communism or democracy, that's my point here. Where do you turn? You're going to be neutral? Then you really know who your friends are.
But General Singirok, do you have a view on this?
My view about the American sphere of influence is not a critique, but it's America has its own national interest to protect, and I think the last of many frontiers other than Europe is the Pacific. So see, the Americans are now going to justify why they should have a large standing military in the Pacific other than the 7th Fleet in Hawaii, because the closing down of Okinawa would now justify a purpose to use the military in the Pacific. Now how do we deal with it? And I believe that the military budget has now gone down, but it's going to go down further once they start to rationalize their resources. Now, in the Pacific, we need to come together, and we need to extract some of that resources if America is fair income about using Pacific states and building capacity. At the moment, it's arm's length away. So the obvious choice is for us to build our economy through various bilateral arrangements that we have with countries who are prepared to slice a bit of their profits into building our capacity. At the moment, we don't have a voice. We don't have a military. We don't have a forum security mechanism. So I think the onus is on these forums to build and to voice their concern, to put their resources together, as I have recommended, so that we collectively are in a position to bargain. But we have to do it in the peaceful Pacific way.
There are many alliances in the world, including international alliances that we belong to. In the Pacific, you see some people are allied economically and diplomatically with Taiwan. Some are aligned economically and diplomatically with China. Australia has a mixed alignment too. They have a military interest with the United States in the Northern Territory, but at the same time Australia has this great deal of selling oil to China. Of course, many things. Well, I'm saying, is that bad? I am in no position to judge, because in the Pacific, this is what we should be looking out for. Where and who can we look to for help? And our most immediate concern in the Pacific is the establishment of a good economic base where it will support improved social levels in the Pacific Islands. Neutrality is neither here nor there in this issue. Imagine, and may I borrow your imaginations for a while, a man climbs a coconut tree. He gets up to the halfway coconut tree and he stops. He stops there. He's looking down and somebody's picking up the coconut that has fallen down, and he looks up there and the birds are feeding on the sugar. But he's in the middle of that. What should this man do? He must make a decision, either to climb up for that sweet or to climb back down and pick the copra. but he can't stay up there. I don't think Pacific nations have that luxury to remain neutral geopolitically or to ostracize one nation or another at the expense of our needs.
I think maybe another perspective. I've served a member now of the House Foreign Affairs Committee for 24 years, and composed of 48 members of Congress. Our responsibility is to oversee all U.S. foreign policies throughout the world. Well, 24 years ago, nobody wanted to discuss Asia-Pacific issues because the entire mentality in Washington was towards the Middle East and Europe. And to this day, I'm still screaming bloody murder for my country to pay more attention to what's happening in the Pacific. But does that make it bad? No, we have to continue the effort. We have to engage. We have to continue the effort of saying we need to make sure that these players, G2, G8, G20, wherever they might be, pay attention to what's happening to the needs of our Pacific Island nations. And that's the challenge for us. And I think staying neutral is not one of them.
There's an old saying, and I don't think it came to be simply because somebody woke up one morning and thought about it. It must have been born of experience that you need to keep your enemies close to you. Now, if in fact these are enemies, then you must engage them. Those who are with Taiwan, talk to them, don't make war. Those who are with China, talk to them, don't make war, because the effect is it's not going to be good for Pacific. And that is where I'm coming from with this flexible engagement with foreign friends.
Thank you for supporting our views.
Yes, I know. Frenemies. So now we'll go to the audience to pose some questions if we have any members of the audience who'd be interested in asking the panelists. We have a question here.
I'm a bit confused about the idea of neutrality and non-alignment. Can members of Parliament clarify this? Because in Vanuatu, we claim to have adopted a non-alignment policy. In fact, we were the only country in the Pacific who became members of the non-aligned summit, non-aligned movement in the world. And so we try to maintain a non-aligned foreign policy because we realize we are a very small country. We depend, all of us, on foreign aid. You can have your non-alignment, but you depend on, on the hands that feed you. Of course, the military issue is another point, but I just want some clarification on the issue on the principle of non-alignment and neutrality. Where does this fit in this debate?
Well, the way I see it, to be neutral is to be non-aligned. When you align yourself, you are committing to a certain relationship with a country. So this is what we are saying in these conflicts that are going on. We stay neutral. We don't align ourselves to any of the conflicting parties because we will end up being the person between the dog and the lamppost, and you risk getting wet in the process. So that's what we're saying. And you took the opportunity to join the non-aligned alliance movement. Even that, to me, even though it's an organization of non-aligned nations, you are aligning yourselves to some extent to that organization, even though that is the policy that you take, that you stay neutral with other countries. And thank you for raising that point, because that was a point that I missed, that in the discussions that we have had, Vanuatu has been held up as an example of a new country. It's done very well indeed. And I was going to say that some years ago, Vanuatu was voted as the happiest country in the world. And I was going to say that there must be something in being neutral. Thank you, Minister, for raising that.
Neutral or neutered?
I just want to respond that it's my understanding that the non-alignment movement was a byproduct of the Cold War. And we had leaders like Sukarno, Marshal Tito, Yugoslavia, Nasser of Egypt. They're the ones that coined up, or Nehru of India, coined up the idea that we need to maintain a sense of neutrality because of the height of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. There is no formal organization of being a non-aligned country. I mean, you just meet a lot of times, but in really having any real substance, because most of the countries are also members of the United Nations. And to your question about being non-aligned and being neutral, my colleague has said it's being neutered is another way of looking at it. You know, we have a saying, fish or cut bait. And I think for being a neutral country, I commend Vanuatu for having being able to being a beneficiary of the millennial program that we have, where you were able to get, what, $60 million? Well, there's nothing wrong with maintaining your membership as being a non-aligned country and still be able to draw from whatever country that can give you the kind of assistance that you need.
Thank you. If we have any more questions, I think we have one from a lady over here.
Just a question on the issues of alliances. When you were talking alliances, I heard two regions or countries. One was Australia and New Zealand, and the other was Asia. And I think Mr. Tavola talked about alliances being in the context of power and dominance. Now, is there any interest in Pacific Islands, for Pacific Islands as a region or in terms of national interest, of allying with other developing countries, or what some people call South-South solidarity, allying with countries in Caribbean or Southeast Asia, Africa? Or is it always about allying with more dominant nations? Thank you.
Maybe alliance may be a wrong word in this example that you raised. It's a membership of an association, organization with certain objectives, certain goals, for instance. And ACP is a very good example, where 79 of the ACP countries have come together to form a group because we have commonality in our interest, and through numbers, comfort of numbers, we can be influential in the discussions we have. And we have been quite influential. We have got the assistance of the European Union up to 2020. We don't know what's going to happen after that. Hopefully it will continue. So it's association and membership of an organization with an objective and goals.
I'm getting alignment, being allies to this and being neutral. I'm getting confused. You know, I really feel that there is no need for neutrality because everybody's working for the same goal. I think that Russia, United States, and China do get together in a room somewhere and discuss their business. And that's because of if you want to know your enemies, stay close to them. And I'm not saying we are enemies of these countries. I'm saying it is better to go out there and promote the interest of the Pacific by actively participating in discussions about us. And I've said that before, and I will continue to say it, that we must, even if they don't hear us, the sin is on them. But we should not sin against us by not speaking out for our own interests.
Thank you. We're now going to, I'm now going to ask the panellists to each wrap up their positions in 1 or 2 words.
Thank you, Chairperson. I go back to my earlier points on the Pacific Way, which is friends to all, enemy to none. I think we should be building our capacity as small Pacific nations, build our governments through good governance, and work on our economy so that we invest a little bit more in regional capacity building, in security work, so that we become a force to be reckoned with, we become a voice of the Pacific, so that we can deal with these challenges that we're now confronted with the superpower rivalry, which is basically predominance, the influx of China and the lesser nations like Taiwan and Korea into the Pacific, and also be cautious of the fact that the build-up of the American military in the Guam area has a significant impact on the influences of China into the Pacific. So I think it's time now that the Pacific states must relook at the way we do business, within the context of the Pacific Way. Thank you.
I've listened very well. I still believe that what we are arguing is the way to go. I like the comment from the last speaker talking about peace and stability, and that's really where we are coming from. In our ocean, we want to promote our own interests, and we have our own interest here that has a global reach, and we want to maintain our Pacific Ocean as the ocean of peace. And through neutrality, we can concentrate on strengthening our regionalism. And we keep talking about regionalism. Sub-regionalism is going to make regionalism strong. And we promote that because we want peace and stability in our area of the world.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, even a dead man leaves no legacy of neutrality after he has gone. We must continue as a Pacific nation, whether we have organizations, within organizations, and finally within the United Nations. These are all good organizations. We must continue to participate in them willingly, actively, to protect the interests of the Pacific. I cannot for a second believe that being neutral, whether it's because geopolitics, whether it's because I'm anti-communist or pro-democracy, I believe that engagement is a responsibility that the people of the Pacific, the leaders of the Pacific, have for the Pacific people to promote and to continue to seek out those nations with which we can continue to interest them in our values and our interests. And with that, I'd like to take the rest of my time to thank the promoters of the organizers of this debate, and to thank the people of Vanuatu for allowing those of us who have traveled here to be here with you on this very important occasion. Thank you very much.
The world is constantly moving. Whether it was 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago, even till now, the world is constantly changing. But there are some fundamental values, core values, that I think it's common among all our Pacific Island cultures. We want to live as a free people. We want to live in such a way that we want to determine our own futures and our own destinies. And I would like to offer the suggestion that straddling the fence is not one of them. Being warm or lukewarm is not one of them. And I think it's something that it comes to the point where we really have to make a stand. What do you stand for? What do you believe in? And I think this is all part of the human spirit, that we all want to be and to live as a free people, whether it be here in the Pacific, whether it be in Asia or any other region of the world. And whether you like it or not, America is there. And we have now China to contend with. Not that the people of China are evil or bad people, but there's a system that goes on, and hopefully through time, things will change. But to suggest that we ought to stay neutral, and when it comes to the real fundamental issues, I think my colleague and I have to take exception to that. And I like to kind of think that, as the saying goes, fish are cut bait. And we don't want to go through another experience of being surprised in terms of when it comes to fundamental security needs that our region has. I think I would love to think that Pacific Island nations kind of like to look to the United States for help in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, and I would like to thank all the panelists for a very thought-provoking discussion. I will now hand it over to Tanya Nugent to wrap up and do the final polling.
Well, before we began today's Pacific debate, we took a poll from our audience to find out which side of this motion they favoured. So now we're going to conduct a final poll with our audience to see whether anyone's shifted and see what's happened in the course of the last 50 minutes. So, ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to get your cards ready? Those for the motion, can you hold up a green card? And those against the motion, please hold up the red card. And can you just keep them raised in the air? Okay, so while we're waiting for the final numbers to be counted for the poll following the debate, we can reveal that in the poll that we took before the debate, the majority of people in our audience here today were against the motion. However, having heard the discussion and heard the points of view from our panellists,